This is part 7 of Uniform, our last lecture, and we're going to continue talking about some of the changes that are going on in America due to some of the economic and social factors. So let's begin, and let's talk about industrialization. Industrialization is the process where we're starting to make things with machines in mass quantities instead of by hand, as they had traditionally been done in small shops or on farms or things like that. So industrialization is going to come to America. It's already big in Britain. You know that Britain has a booming industry side of their economy, especially the textile industry. That's where a lot of the southern cotton is going towards and so forth. So you already know that. And you may have heard of this guy before. Samuel Slater is a guy that he's from America. He's an American, and he goes over to England and he takes a tour, and he memorizes the design of some of the machines, because the British were keeping the steam engine secret. And this guy figures out, just by looking at it, how to build one, comes home and boom, starts up steam engines in America, and American industry takes off. And so we're in competition with them, with England and primarily. The first thing that really starts off as far as factories goes is textile mills. And again, this is because in the north, the weather and the geography are not really conducive to farming as it is in the south or in the west. And so we start textile mills to take advantage of the cotton that's being produced in the south. And one thing that was different about our textile mills is that we were going to build almost a single community around a textile mill. So you'd have a textile mill, and then you'd have like a church and a general store and everything all in one place. And that was different. Prior to this, a lot of times not only did you not have the town first and then the mill, but you also had to send the product different places to get finished. For example, for cotton, first it would get cleaned to the seeds in one area, and then it would get spun into yarn, and then another, and then it would put on a loom in another place and put into great big bolts of cloth, and then it would be sent another place to be made into a finished product. Well, now these mills are going to do all of that in one place. It's going to be kind of a centrally located thing. And in your books, the story of the Lowell textile mills found in Massachusetts, which becomes the model, the first ones starting there, and I want you to read that, as I always do, and we'll kind of read that in class as well. But the Lowell textile mill factory, or the Lowell town, becomes the model that every other one's kind of copy for a while. And what's going to be unique about this is there's such a shortage of labor at the time, hence why we have to have slaves. There's such a shortage of labor. What these guys do is they want to tap into a labor source that's available that nobody's really exploited before, and that's young women that are not married. Women were living with their parents. Parents would take care of them until they're married. And so what these guys are going to do is encourage people to come off the small farms, and for a year or two, until they're ready to get married, come work at our factory. And women, young women, we're talking 15, 16 generally, but even older than that, are going to do that because they're excited to get off the farm and see some different parts of the world, and they're going to go live at this factory in Massachusetts, and they're going to live in dorms. They're going to have roommates, and these are really rigidly controlled by the company, kind of what they do in their off time, trying to protect women, of course, but also kind of seeing what they're exposed to. And we'll talk more about this. There's some activities we're going to do in the book, but again, this becomes the model that's kind of copied. And what ends up happening eventually over time is early on, the workers are seen as a nice. They're treated in a nice way, although they're not making tons of money. But they're getting fair wage. The places that they're working at are fairly clean, fairly safe. In Europe, the factories were seen as horrible places, and the first factories here in America wanted to have nothing in common with that, and so they tried to do away with that. But what happens as the years go on is there's more competition, there's more workers that are coming to America. There's going to be, for example, the potato famine in Ireland, and so a lot of Irish are coming and they're going to be looking for jobs. And now that there's competition for those jobs, and eventually over time, of course, there's more factories and more competition for product, they have to cut their wages and they have to try to save money any way they can. So conditions worsen, all these kinds of things, and so conditions get really bad. So one of the things that happens is the South takes a look at what's going on in the North and says, aha, you guys are calling the kettle black. You guys have slaves just like we do. You call them wage slaves. Your people are making money off of their work, but they're living in worse conditions than our slaves down in the South. They're living in filth. They're living in these horrible dormitories, or later on they're going to be called tenements, and you're just exploiting these people. You're treating them just as a spare part, where we love our slaves. They're part of our family. We take care of them. You don't. If they get sick, you get hurt, they get hurt, you don't have anything to do with them. Well, as our plantation, we do. So they start to compare these wage earners in the North with slaves in the South and say that their system is worse. Of course, the comeback to that is obvious. What is the one thing that people in the North that work in factories can do that slaves cannot? And the answer is very simple. They can leave their job. They can find a different job. They can go back to the farm. They have options, whereas slaves do not. But that's the comparison that's drawn. And again, we'll talk a little bit more in class. There's some activities that we're going to do to show you what it was like to be a slave, or to be a worker in the North, to see if they are comparable to slaves in many regards. Other things that happen to change industry in America is Eli Whitney again is going to invent something that's going to change not only industry in America but industry worldwide, which is the idea of interchangeable parts. Prior to this, if something was made, it was made from scratch, and it was made as a whole. For example, Eli Whitney's big one was with a gun. If you made a gun, you made one at a time, and you made it from scratch, and you assembled it all together. Well, what Eli Whitney did when he got a contract from the United States Army was to break guns down into different parts that were interchangeable. I could take a part off this gun and put it on any other gun, and it would still work. And that's going to totally speed up production. And so one of the things that really becomes important in these early factories is speed. We got to go faster. The faster we go, the more products we churn out. The more products we churn out, the more profit for me. And that becomes one of the big issues, is the pace that these people are forced to work at. But that's due to Eli Whitney and his idea of interchangeable parts. And we talked a little bit about the negative side, about how the pace was increased of work and made work more difficult. But one of the benefits is, as you can see here on the board, it actually led to some benefits for the common people, because now goods were going to be cheaper as it cost less to produce them. That savings oftentimes was passed on to people, and they got to buy things that they could never do before. Store-bought clothes was a really big deal. Most people, only had clothes that were made for them by their wives or their grandma or whoever the case may be. And so this actually kind of leveled the playing field a little bit, but just a little bit, because what's going to happen is with industry and the big changes that are going to that are going to happen because of that, there is going to be a huge gap that develops between the rich and the poor, and that gap's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's always a gap, of course, but the gap's going to get bigger, and more wealth is going to be put in the hands of a few people, and the gap between the rich and the poor will get bigger. But common people there's going to eventually develop a middle class because of all this, and common people are going to see some of the benefits of industrialization as well, with cheaper products allowing them to buy things that they never had the money to do before. And as I mentioned just a second ago, one of the things that happens is there's a rise in a middle class in America that happens now with industrialization. You not only have the owners, and then you have the factory workers, but you're going to need somebody in between to manage, to supervise, to be the foreman in essence. You need people in between, because the owners, they might own several factories, and they're certainly not going to be caught there all the time. They can't run things day to day. One of the things that's happening is businesses are getting bigger and bigger, from small mom and pop shops where everybody works together in an intimate relationship, where everybody knows each other and you're either close friends or family. Now you're owning big things that have hundreds of workers, and you might own several of those, and so you can't be there all the time to run it. You need people in between, and that leads to the rise of the middle class, which is kind of a unique feature to American industry. Again, in Europe, you're going to have pretty much just the rich and poor, but in America, we start to see more of a middle class develop, and it becomes now a lot easier to move up and down the economic ladder, which is good. It motivates people on the bottom. I can rise up. It motivates people in the middle. I can rise up to that upper echelon. That leads to a lot of healthy things in our society. But what it also leads to is intense competition between people to get those coveted middle ladder spots, those middle class spots, and to get into positions to better their lives. And so what ends up happening is there's intense rivalry between men who are vying for these positions, and so they have to start doing things a little bit better than the other guy, and they're home less and working longer hours, which means on the home front, the women is going to get put more and more charge of things. For example, one of the things that happens as a result of that is women get put more and more in charge of religion. Early on, you might remember the Puritan belief that women could not be trusted, that women were easily deceived. You know, the whole story of Adam and Eve we went through. Well, for most of our early history, men have run religion. And now, with this new development, with men not being around as much, women are going to take over more of that role. They're going to not only take care of religion, but they're going to be spending some of the household money a little bit more. They're going to be, of course, doing the Republican motherhood thing, these kinds of things. But women are going to see a little bump in responsibility. Not that they have more rights. They're still seen mostly as property. They still don't have a lot of property rights, and they can't own a lot of things. And of course, they're still restricted to certain spheres of what they're allowed to talk about, learn about, and what jobs they're allowed to do. But they're going to get a little bit more of opportunity inside their own marriage or in their own house to decide some things. So there is a little bit of that change. So just remember that men become extremely busy with work outside the home. They're no longer, you know, one of the things that changes is before men and women kind of worked side by side to make their place go, their farm go. They had to split the chores, and women often would work in the fields with men doing different tasks right along with them. Now we're having more of separate spheres of influence where men are the breadwinners. They are, you know, responsible for what happens outside the home, making sure that the people have the house has the necessities that it needs, where women are more at home taking care of the house and doing the day-to-day activities, raising the kids. Kind of that traditional thing that lasts until the 1950s, I guess, where, you know, this is women's work, this is man's work. Okay? Prior to this, prior to industrialization, they often had to work together to make things go. Okay? And you kind of see that in the notes here, what I'm talking about, what is often referred to as the cult of domesticity, where this is women's work, this is what women do, this is what men do, men are the breadwinners, it's that kind of thing. And as you can see on the board, and as I mentioned, that lasts kind of until the 1950s. So that's a term you'll often see. You kind of need to know what it refers to, that basically, you know, that traditional belief that women are for raising children, taking care of the home, where guys are out making the money and providing the necessities of the family. Last couple things here in notes. Forms of entertainment that become very popular. Now that we have people moving to cities, and we have people not living on the rural farm anymore, some of the things that become popular are dime novels, or very cheap novels. And the reason these become popular, especially for women, is they provide guidance. Okay, I'm supposed to raise the kid. You know, how do I raise kids properly? Well, I read this magazine, or I read this novel or this story. That'll tell me how to do that. Or how do I help my husband get the promotion? You know, how do I help him succeed in the business realm? Well, this helps me. Why is this important? It's just to tell you that things are changing for people. They're not just reading the Bible anymore. They're not just reading newspapers. They're not just being concerned with politic or political pamphlets as really the only things we've mentioned in class that people have really read up to this point. They're reading things for fun. They're reading things for outside or different purposes, and that's changing their thinking. Of course, that's eventually going to lead to advertising, and that's going to have, you know, kind of a big impact as well. So that's kind of why it's in here. And then finally, people start to get really stressed out, and really, you know, all that competition, vying for jobs, and, you know, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And so some different things happen in society as well. You know, early on, our country was revolving around Puritan ideas, and then the ideas of the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. Now we're going to change a little bit again, because times have changed. Things are not as important. One of the things that's a big change is the Enlightenment ideas, or the Age of Reason, where we got to back everything up with observation and science. That's going to kind of go by the wayside, and we're going to turn to a more romantic view of the world, where more people, you know, kind of just take a leap of faith. I don't have to see it, I can just believe it. A more romantic view of the world, where you're not running or making your decisions based on your head or your knowledge, but making them based on your heart, what you think to believe. And part of one of those movements that kind of comes out of that is something that's fairly influential called transcendentalism. And this is a very complicated concept. It's kind of a religious belief, but it's also just kind of a code of ethics or a way to live your life. And this develops out of this need to handle this intense pressure. People just can't handle this competition, and I gotta get ahead, gotta get ahead, gotta get ahead. How do I do that? And so there's some different things that develop, and one of the most influential is this idea of transcendentalism. And this is believed to be that there's divineness or part of God in every human being, and because of that, every human being has the potential, and society therefore has the potential of being perfect. We just kind of need to figure out how to do that. And part of that is just living simple, having a great relationship with nature. Nature is the closest we can get to God. It's the closest thing on earth that's perfect. And spending time with nature will help show us the way to be perfect and to perfect our society. And so transcendentalism is kind of a popular belief by many people at the time. Henry David Thoreau, Waldo Emerson, some very famous early American writers, Walt Whitman, for example. They are transcendentalists. And one of the things that's kind of kooky or funny or strange here is a lot of these guys, they try to break away and form what we call utopian societies, kind of their own little perfect communities away from the rat race of the cities that are developing and things like that. And they find out they don't work too well, because you have to work there, and not too many people are willing to do the little menial tasks, not very long anyway. But transcendentalism has a big impact on other movements in our country. That's why it's important to know. Again, it's kind of hard to understand, but basically it's the idea that God lives in everyone. There's a light inside all of us. We just need to figure out how to let that light shine. And if we do that, we can perfect society. We can make society a better place. And that motivates people to do a lot of changes in the society or in our country. And that's coming up in kind of future lectures a little bit more. So that's kind of America, again, becoming a modern nation. Today we focus more on the industrial side. We're talking a little bit more on what it was like to live in the North now. Some things to remember: people are moving to cities, what we call urbanization. They're moving there because we have some of the first factories being started. And that dramatically changes lots of things. People now are not making things at home in small quantities. They're making them in big quantities. and they're living in these cities to do that. That also changes how people make a living. It used to be, if I was a shoemaker, for example, or a carpenter or a blacksmith, oftentimes I would make things for trade, for barter. Now it's all on money. I'm earning a wage, and I need to earn a good wage so I can buy food and clothes and shelter, these kind of things. So it's changing a lot of things.